Are you reheating food in your kitchen tonight? Most of you would say yes without even thinking twice about it. Rice from Sunday, still sitting in a container. Chicken from Tuesday, portioned out for the week. Leftover spinach from a big batch you made to save time. A dozen boiled eggs sitting in the fridge door because mornings are easier that way. Here's what nobody ever tells you, and what took me years of actually being inside people's homes to really understand. I have walked into more kitchens than I can count. I have sat at more dinner tables than I can count, cared for more seniors living on their own than I can count. And I have watched a pattern play out again and again. A pattern almost nobody connects to what's actually happening on their stove or in their microwave. Today I'm going to walk you through 4 foods. 4 foods that are probably sitting in your refrigerator right now. 4 foods that I personally stopped letting my patients reheat carelessly once I understood why. Stay with me until the end, because the 4th one surprises almost everyone I talk to, even the people who are convinced they eat perfectly healthy. My name is Sarah, I'm 45 years old, and for close to 20 years now, I've worked in geriatric care and home health. That means my entire career hasn't been spent behind a desk, or in a lab somewhere reading numbers off a printout. It's been spent inside real homes, watching real routines, sitting across from real people at their actual kitchen tables. I've seen what people really eat, not what they write down on an intake form when they're trying to look good for their doctor. That distinction matters more than you'd think. Everything I'm about to share with you doesn't come from a textbook I read once. It comes from direct, repeated, hands-on experience, meal after meal, year after year, patient after patient. Before I go any further, I want to ask you for something small. If you're watching this and you, or someone you love, lives alone, or cooks once and eats off it for days at a time, go ahead and subscribe right now, and leave a comment telling me your age, or the age of the person you're picturing while you watch this. I read every single comment that comes through. Honestly, the stories people share with me shape what I decide to cover next, so it genuinely helps. Okay, let's get into it. Before we get to the 4 foods themselves, I want to explain something in plain language, because I think this is the piece that gets skipped over most often. When you cook food for the first time, whether it's rice, chicken, greens, or eggs, that food goes through a completely normal set of changes. Heat does what heat is supposed to do. But once that food is cooked, cooled, and stored, and especially once it sits in the fridge for a day or two, it isn't quite the same food anymore, even though it looks and smells identical. Some of what's inside that food has already started shifting on its own, quietly, while it just sits there. Then, when you reheat it, you're not simply warming up the same food you cooked the first time. You're applying heat to something that has already changed once. That's really the heart of everything I'm about to walk you through. It's not about any single food being dangerous. It's about what happens to that food between the first time you cook it and the second time you heat it back up. Food number 1, rice. I cannot tell you how many of my patients, especially the ones living alone, cook one big pot of rice on a Sunday and eat off that same pot for the entire week. And honestly, it makes complete sense. It's cheap, it's filling, and it's easy on a tired body that doesn't want to stand at the stove every single night. But here's what I started noticing years ago, long before I understood exactly why it was happening. Rice that sits in the fridge and gets reheated day after day is simply not behaving the same way as rice eaten fresh off the stove. There's a certain bacteria that naturally lives in raw rice. It's not some rare contamination, it's just there, in ordinary rice, in ordinary kitchens. That bacteria survives the initial cooking, and if the rice cools down slowly or sits out on the counter for a while before it goes into the fridge, that bacteria can multiply and leave behind a toxin. And here is the part that genuinely caught my attention the first time I really looked into it. Reheating that rice, even heating it until it's steaming hot all the way through, does not get rid of that toxin. It stays right there in the bowl, no matter how hot you make the rice. I remember a patient, I'll call him Robert, 78 years old, living alone in Columbus, Ohio, after his wife had passed away a few years earlier. Every single Sunday, he'd cook a big pot of rice, partly because it was practical, and partly, he told me once, because it reminded him of the meals she used to make. He'd eat off that pot all week long to save money, and to save the energy of cooking every day. For months, he kept telling me his stomach just wasn't right most days. Nothing dramatic, nothing that sent him to the emergency room. Just this constant low-grade tiredness, some bloating, a sense of feeling generally off that he'd started to assume was just part of getting older. We changed exactly one thing in his routine. He started cooking smaller batches. He started cooling the rice quickly instead of leaving the pot sitting on the stove for hours after dinner, and he started eating it within a day or two, instead of stretching one pot across an entire week. A month later, he told me he felt like a different person. And I want to be honest with you, that's not a coincidence I've only seen once. I've watched that exact pattern repeat itself over and over in different homes, with different people, across almost 2 decades. Pause on that for a second, because I want it to really land. This isn't about being afraid of rice. Rice is a wonderful, affordable, filling food, and it belongs on your table. This is about how long it sits, and how it's cooled, before it ever gets reheated a second or third time. Here's what I actually tell my patients now, in plain practical terms. Cook rice fresh whenever you reasonably can. If you do need to store it, get it into the refrigerator within about an hour of cooking. Don't let the pot sit out on the counter or stove all afternoon while you go about your day. Try to eat it within a day, maybe 2 at the most. And please, don't reheat the same batch more than once. If you're going to eat it again after that, it's better to just make a fresh, smaller pot. Food number 2, chicken. This one tends to catch people off guard, because chicken is supposed to be the safe protein. Every dietitian, every doctor, every health article tells you lean protein, and chicken sits right at the top of that list. My patients who are genuinely trying to eat well almost always have a big tray of baked or grilled chicken sitting in the fridge, portioned out to reheat across the week. And I understand exactly why. It feels responsible. It feels like doing the right thing. But here's what I noticed, working specifically with older bodies that tend to be more sensitive to inflammation to begin with. Chicken that gets reheated over and over, especially blasted at high heat in a microwave, seems to sit differently with people than chicken eaten fresh the same day it was cooked. There's a patient I think about often, Patricia, 81 years old, living in Phoenix, Arizona. She meal prepped chicken every single Sunday for the entire week because standing and cooking every day was hard on her joints, and only cooking once made her life so much easier. Over time, she started coming to me with joint pain that seemed to flare more often than her labs alone could explain, along with some digestive discomfort, just this general sense of feeling more inflamed than she should have. We didn't touch her medications. We didn't add a single supplement. We simply changed how she was handling that chicken. Smaller batches, cooked more often instead of one giant tray, reheated gently instead of blasted on high in the microwave, eaten within a couple of days instead of stretched across the full week. Within a few weeks, she told me her joints felt noticeably calmer, and she genuinely seemed lighter, more like herself. Now, I want to be careful here, because I'm not telling you that every single ache or pain in every senior traces back to a container of leftover chicken sitting in the fridge. What I am telling you is that I've watched this exact pattern repeat itself often enough, in different patients, in different states, that I stopped being able to ignore it. And once I saw it clearly, I stopped letting my own patients ignore it too. So here's what I tell people now. If you can, eat leftover chicken cold, in a salad or wrapped up in a tortilla instead of reheating it at all. If you do need to reheat it, use the lowest gentle heat setting you have, not a full blast on high, and try not to let one batch of chicken become a 5 or 6 day a week habit. Food number 3, spinach and other leafy greens like it. This is the one that genuinely surprised me the first time I really put the pieces together, because spinach is the food that every single doctor tells older adults to eat more of. Iron, folate, all the good things you're supposed to be getting more of as you age. And I agree completely, fresh spinach is a wonderful food. The problem I started noticing wasn't with spinach itself, it was specifically with cooked spinach that sits in the fridge for days and then gets reheated later on. Leafy greens like spinach, along with celery and beets, naturally carry certain compounds that, once the food sits and cools for a while, can begin to shift into a different form entirely, quietly, without you ever seeing or tasting the difference. And when that already shifted spinach gets reheated, it simply isn't behaving the same way it did the very first time you cooked it fresh. I had a patient, Dorothy, 74 years old, living in a small town just outside Baton Rouge, Louisiana. She cooked a big batch of spinach every few days because after a health scare she was trying so hard to eat right. And honestly, she was doing everything she genuinely believed was correct. When I sat down with her and actually walked through her real day-to-day routine, it turned out that spinach was sitting in her fridge for 3, sometimes 4 days at a time, and she'd microwave a small portion of it each night for dinner. We didn't tell her to eat less spinach. That would have been the wrong lesson entirely. We simply changed the habit around it. Cook a smaller amount more often. Eat it the same day whenever possible. And if there's extra left over, eat it cold in something like a salad rather than reheating it days later. That's really the piece I want people to walk away with here. This is not a reason to eat less spinach or to be afraid of leafy greens. It's a reason to pay closer attention to how long that spinach has actually been sitting before you heat it back up. Pause there for just a moment, because I know this is a lot to take in all at once. I'm not telling you any of this to scare you away from food or to make you feel like your kitchen is suddenly a dangerous place. I'm telling you because these are small, quiet habits, the kind that nobody ever thinks twice about, and I've personally watched them affect people I care deeply about in this line of work again and again. Food number 4, and this is genuinely the one that surprises almost everyone I explain this to: eggs. Eggs get treated like the safest food on the entire planet. Protein, choline, healthy fats, nutritionists and physicians recommend them constantly, and honestly, they're right to. Eggs really are one of the most nutritious, complete foods you can eat. But reheating already cooked eggs, especially scrambled eggs or hard-boiled eggs, especially in a microwave, is something I quietly stopped recommending to my patients years ago, once I started paying closer attention. The fat inside the egg yolk goes through certain changes the very first time it's cooked. That part is completely normal and expected. But when that already cooked egg gets refrigerated and then blasted with heat a second time, those changes seem to speed up in a way that fresh eggs simply don't show. I think of a patient, Margaret, 79 years old, living in a quiet neighborhood near Baton Rouge, who boiled a full dozen eggs every single Sunday. So breakfast would be ready and waiting all week, without her having to cook something fresh every single morning. Honestly, I understood completely why she did it. It made her mornings so much simpler, and mornings can be hard when you're managing everything on your own. What we adjusted wasn't the eggs themselves, and it certainly wasn't her breakfast routine as a whole. It was simply how she stored and reheated them. Keep hard-boiled eggs in the shell right up until you're ready to eat one, and eat them cold rather than microwaving them straight from the fridge. If she really wanted something warm on a colder morning, a gentle warm water bath instead of the microwave did the trick. It was such a small change, and she told me she didn't even feel like she'd given anything up. So let me pull all of this together for you, because I know that's a lot of detail to sit with. 4 foods: rice, chicken, spinach, and eggs. Every single one of them is genuinely healthy, and every single one of them absolutely belongs in your diet. This was never about the food itself being the enemy. It's about what happens to that food after it's already been cooked once, sitting quietly in a fridge, and then brought back to life with heat a second or third time. That's the part almost nobody ever talks about, and it's the part I've watched quietly shape the health of patient after patient, over 20 years of actually walking into people's real kitchens and sitting at their real tables. Here's what I genuinely want you to walk away and do, starting today, this week, right now if you can. With rice, cook it fresh whenever you reasonably can, and if you do store it, cool it quickly and eat it within a day or two, not stretched across a whole week. With chicken, eat your leftovers cold when possible, and if you do reheat it, keep the heat gentle and don't let one single batch carry you through 5 or 6 days in a row. With spinach and other leafy greens, avoid reheating them altogether if you can help it. Eat them cold instead, or simply cook smaller, fresher portions more often. And with eggs, store them unpeeled, eat them cold when you can, and if you truly want them warm, reach for gentle heat, never a hard blast in the microwave. None of this requires any special equipment, and none of it requires some complicated new routine you have to force yourself into. Really, at its core, it comes down to 3 simple habits: smaller batches, cooling food quickly, and reheating gently instead of blasting it on high. Now, I do want to say this clearly because it genuinely matters to me. I am not a doctor, and nothing in this video is meant to replace an actual conversation with your physician or with a registered dietitian, especially if you're managing any ongoing health condition. What I've shared with you today comes entirely from what I've personally observed again and again in the homes and in the lives of the patients I've had the privilege of caring for. If anything I've said today concerns you or makes you want to take a closer look at your own routine, please bring it up with your doctor or your pharmacist. That conversation is always, always worth having. Before you go, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want to hear your answer. Of these 4, rice, chicken, spinach, or eggs, which one surprised you the most? Which one is sitting in your refrigerator right this second? Tell me in the comments below, and tell me who you're thinking of while you watch this, because I promise you, you are not the only one sitting there right now thinking about it. And if there's a specific food you'd like me to look into next, something you or someone you love eats and reheats all the time, leave that in the comments too. Because next time, I want to talk about the warning signs of food-related illness in older adults, the ones that so often get quietly brushed off as just getting older, and how different those signs actually look than what most people expect. Until then, take care of yourselves and please, take care of the people you love.